The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and quiet tension. I was seated 3 chairs down from Victor, my supervisor, watching him click through a slide deck he had not spent a single night building. Every slide on that screen came from me. The data, the charts, the color-coded timelines I had refined over 19 straight working days, the framework at the heart of the whole presentation. The one I had rebuilt twice from scratch because I wasn't satisfied with my first 2 attempts, and now Victor was standing at the front of the room, moving through it like a man touring a house he had never helped build. "What we've done here," he said, clicking to the next slide, "is completely rethink the way logistics flow connects with cost output. What we've done." The client's team, 4 people from Hargrove Financial, the biggest account our firm had chased in 3 years, nodded steadily. They were engaged, impressed, even. I gripped my pen under the table. I had poured everything into this account. Late nights, weekends, more hours than I had tracked. This wasn't just a project to me. It was the kind of opportunity that could change the direction of a career. And Victor had walked into that room wearing my work like it was his own. I sat still and watched. My name is Aaron Webb, 34 years old, senior planning analyst at Caldwell Group, a mid-sized operations consulting firm based in Atlanta. I had been with the company for 5 years. Long enough to understand how things worked, but apparently not long enough to know how to protect what I built. I wasn't the loudest person in the office. I never had been. I came up through effort, not politics. I studied systems, built models, and let my results speak for themselves. For a long time, that approach had been enough. My wife, Nadia, was 6 months pregnant with our first child. We had recently bought a small house on the east side of the city, a house that stretched our budget in ways we hadn't quite adjusted to yet. I had been working toward a promotion to Director of Planning Strategy for nearly 2 years. Our department head had told me 3 months earlier that the right project could push me over the line. The Hargrove Financial account was that project. I had treated it like my one real shot. I gave it everything, every weekend, every early morning, every scrap of focus I had. And now Victor Crane, my supervisor, was presenting it to the client as though he had built it himself. I hadn't seen it coming. Looking back, I probably should have. 2 nights before the client meeting, Victor appeared at my desk just after 7 o'clock. The office had mostly emptied out. The overhead lights had gone into their automatic dim setting. I was still at my computer, making final adjustments to the sensitivity model on slide 14. "Still at it?" he said, leaning against the partition with his hands in his pockets. I nodded. "Almost done. Just cleaning up the model." He smiled. That easy, unhurried smile that I had never quite been able to read. "Send it over when you're finished," he said. "I'll give it a final polish before the Hargrove meeting. Make sure the formatting looks sharp enough for their team." Polish. That one word. It sounded simple. Professional. Like something a good supervisor would say. I sent him the full deck at 11:48 that night. 22 slides, 3 embedded data models, and a 6-page appendix I had built entirely by hand. His reply came back 11 minutes later. "Looks sharp. Good work. No questions. No edits. Not a single comment about the sensitivity model or the logic behind any of the numbers." I remember thinking that was odd. A thorough supervisor would have asked at least one question. But I was tired. And I was relieved. I closed my laptop and went home to Nadia. That was the last time my name appeared anywhere near that deck. Victor had a way of filling a room that I had always watched from a distance. He was confident, well-dressed, and spoke with the kind of calm authority that made people assume he understood more than he did. He never seemed rushed, never seemed uncertain. In meetings, he carried himself like someone who had already read the last page. That morning was no different. He stood at the head of the table in a charcoal blazer, one hand resting lightly on the clicker, the other settled easily in his pocket. He spoke at a measured pace. He used phrases like, "our strategic approach," and the insight driving this whole design, and the model we developed to stress test the projections. Every pronoun was shared. But every time the room nodded, it nodded at him. I sat in my chair and watched it unfold in real time. The 4 people from Hargrove Financial's team leaned forward. Their operations director, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Obi, had a printed copy of the deck in front of her and was following along closely. They were impressed. Victor looked relaxed. He looked proud. Because from where he stood, he had taken something that wasn't his, walked it into the most important room we'd been in all year, and nobody had stopped him. Not yet. Halfway through the presentation, I noticed Ms. Obi flip back several pages in her printed copy. She had circled something with a red pen. I couldn't see exactly what, but I felt my body go still the moment she looked up. "Victor," she said, her voice polite and precise, "can you walk us through the demand variance model on slide 14? Specifically, how the sensitivity thresholds were calibrated for the quarterly fluctuation bands." I knew every word of that slide. I had spent 4 days building that model. I had cross-referenced 6 different datasets, tested 3 calibration methods, and settled on a weighted rolling average designed to handle both seasonal and irregular demand spike. It was the most technical piece in the entire deck, the part that required the deepest understanding of the data. It was not something you could explain without actually understanding it. Victor smiled. But the smile arrived half a second too late. "Great question," he said. He clicked back to slide 14. He looked at the chart. And then he started talking. Not explaining. Talking. There is a real difference between the two. The words he used were technical, but the logic didn't connect. The explanation started in the right place and quickly drifted somewhere that didn't hold together. Ms. Obi had stopped nodding, and I felt the room shift before anyone said a word. Victor kept going for nearly a full minute. He tried to reframe the question. He used terms like directional alignment and adaptive calibration logic, words that sounded professional but explained nothing about how the model actually worked. Ms. Obi listened carefully. Her colleague, a younger man with a notepad, stopped writing. Then Victor looked at me. It lasted no more than 2 seconds. Just a quick glance down the length of the table, casual enough to seem accidental, deliberate enough to say everything. He needed me to step in. I recognized the look. Not from him personally, but from a type of person. The student who hadn't done the reading, glancing at the one who had. I kept my face completely neutral. Hands folded on the table in front of me. Expression calm. Part of me, the part that had spent 5 years smoothing things over and filling gaps that weren't mine to fill, wanted to help. Wanted to raise my hand and rescue the moment the way I always had. But something inside me had changed the moment I watched him click through my slides like they belonged to him. I wasn't going to save him. Not this time. He doubled down instead, tried a different angle, and the room got quieter. The kind of quiet that only comes right before something breaks. Ms. Obi set her pen down. "Victor," she said, her tone still measured, "your slide states that the sensitivity threshold adjusts at a 15% variance band. But what you just described sounds like a fixed threshold. Those aren't the same thing." The room went completely still. Victor blinked. "Yes," he said. "What I meant was..." He paused. He didn't know what he meant. Because he hadn't built it. He started rephrasing. Then rephrasing the rephrasing. Each attempt took a slightly wider loop around the actual answer, getting less convincing with every pass. Paul, the junior analyst seated near the window, shifted in his chair. He kept his eyes forward, but I could see the discomfort in the way he held himself. Victor clicked the slide forward. Then back. Then forward again. Ms. Obi glanced at her printed copy, then back at him. The man with the notepad wasn't writing anymore. Something was wrong in that room, and everyone could feel it. Not loudly, not with any drama, just the quiet way a crack appears in something that was supposed to hold firm. Victor hadn't built the model. He hadn't written the slide. He didn't understand a single number in that column. And right now, in front of the most important client we'd had in 3 years, that truth was slowly rising. I cleared my throat. Gently. Quietly. Not a dramatic gesture. Just enough to signal that I had something useful to offer. If it helps, I said, keeping my voice easy and even, I can take everyone through the sensitivity logic. Victor's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough for me to notice, and probably nobody else. He didn't stop me. Because he couldn't, not without making the situation considerably worse. Ms. Obi looked directly at me. Please. I leaned forward and began explaining the model the way I had built it, starting from the beginning, using plain language. I described how I had identified the appropriate variance bands, why 15% was the right threshold based on the historical data, and what the results had shown when I stress-tested alternative ranges. I wasn't performing. I wasn't showing off. I was simply explaining work that I knew because I had done it. Ms. Obi's expression changed. Her pen came back to the page. Her colleague with the notepad started writing again. That's much clearer, she said when I finished. That's exactly the kind of reasoning we were hoping to see behind these numbers. She smiled. Not at the room. At me. Victor leaned back in his chair. He said nothing, but the room had quietly turned. And there was nothing he could do to turn it back. The rest of the meeting went smoothly. Ms. Obi asked 3 more technical questions over the following 40 minutes. Victor handled the broad ones. I answered everything that required real detail, not because I forced my way in, but because the client began directing her questions toward me. Aaron, what was your approach to the cost phase structure? Aaron, how does the model respond to a sudden input delay? Aaron, can you walk us through the assumptions behind the implementation timeline? Each question that landed on me felt like a quiet confirmation of something the room had already worked out for itself. Victor kept smiling through all of it. Professionally. Steadily. But the smile was doing more work than it had at the start of the meeting. When Ms. Obi wrapped up, she said Hargrove would be in touch by end of week. She shook hands around the table. When she shook mine, she held it a moment longer than the others. Very thorough work, she said. I thanked her simply. We filed out in a loose group. Paul caught my eye briefly as he passed. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod that said more than any sentence could have. Victor walked ahead. Back straight. Chin level. But something in the way he moved had a crack running through it now. Victor caught up with me just outside the elevator bank. Can we talk for a second? I stopped and turned. Of course. He kept his voice low and controlled. But underneath it, there was an edge he wasn't quite hiding. What was that in there? I looked at him steadily. I was answering their question. You stepped over me. He crossed his arms. In front of the client. I let a moment of silence settle between us before responding. They asked a technical question, I said. You were working through it. I thought it would help to clarify. Don't do that again. His voice dropped another level. I'm the senior person in that room. When you make me look bad, you make the whole team look bad. I nodded once. Understood, I said. I meant it not as agreement but as acknowledgement. I had heard him. Then I turned and walked to the elevator. He didn't follow. On the way back down to my floor, I stood quietly and let the conversation replay in my mind. He hadn't said thank you for keeping the meeting from collapsing. He hadn't acknowledged what had nearly gone wrong. He had walked out of that room and immediately told me not to embarrass him again. That told me exactly what I needed to know. I went back to my desk and began documenting. I wasn't angry in the loud, chest-burning way. But I was clear. I opened a blank document and wrote down everything I could remember from the past 2 days. The night I sent Victor the deck, his reply, the exact sequence of events in the conference room. I wrote it while it was still fresh, with timestamps wherever I could confirm them. Then I went further back. Looking through the previous few months, I found moments I had dismissed at the time. An email chain where Victor had forwarded my analysis to senior leadership and written, putting together some solid thinking on this one, with no mention of my name. A strategy document I had drafted that appeared in a department briefing under Victor's signature, reformatted slightly but otherwise unchanged. A meeting where our VP had praised Victor for the modeling approach on the Fenwick account. I had spent 11 days building that model. Each time, I had told myself it was just how things worked at this level. That credit would find its way to me eventually. Now I wasn't so sure. I went back through 4 months of email threads. I saved copies. I forwarded keychains to my personal archive. I downloaded version histories from the shared drive. I did it quietly, without drawing attention. Because I had learned something sitting in that conference room. Feelings don't protect you. Paper does. 2 weeks after the Hargrove meeting, Victor made an announcement in our team briefing. Given the strong reception from the client, he said, looking around the table with easy confidence, I'll be taking personal ownership of the implementation phase. I want to carry the momentum forward myself. He said not we. Not the team. Just him. I watched the faces around the table. Paul kept his expression flat. 2 others glanced briefly in my direction, then back at Victor. I kept my face still. The problem with what Victor had just done was one I could see immediately, even if no one else in that room could. The implementation phase wasn't presentations and slides. It was vendor coordination, system integration, delivery scheduling, and dozens of technical decisions that would determine whether the project actually delivered what we had promised. Victor didn't have the operational background for any of that. If the rollout succeeded, he would own the credit. And if it failed, the errors would trace back to the planning work, my planning work, and I would be left exposed without a seat at the table. He had constructed a situation where he came out ahead either way. Or so he believed. I went back to my desk, sat quietly for a moment, and thought carefully about what came next. This wasn't over. The weekly check-in calls with Hargrove Financial began the following Monday. Victor led them. I joined as a technical resource, a title he had quietly assigned me in the meeting agenda without asking. I didn't object. I simply showed up and listened. A pattern developed almost immediately. Victor would open each call with updates, milestone progress, broad-stroke timelines, confident-sounding communication. He handled the opening smoothly and kept things moving. Then the client's team would ask specific questions. And every time, without exception, Ms. Obi or one of her colleagues would direct those questions to me. Aaron, where are we on the integration mapping? Aaron, what does the current data show for the first delivery window? Aaron, can you confirm the risk adjustment we discussed last week? I answered each question directly and clearly. Victor never interrupted. Never corrected me. He simply grew quieter each time my name was used. By the 3rd call, Ms. Obi had started addressing me before going to Victor. By the 4th, she was copying me first on email threads and Victor second. Victor had noticed. I could tell by the way he paused before responding to those emails, slightly longer than before, slightly more deliberate. His smile on the calls had grown thinner. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 23 minutes into a check-in call. Victor made a promise he hadn't consulted me about. We can deliver the full system integration by the 22nd of next month, he said. I looked at the calendar on my second monitor. The 22nd was 26 days away. The integration required vendor confirmations, a data migration window, and a parallel testing phase. I had estimated a minimum of 38 days, and that assumed 0 delays from our vendor partners, which was not a safe assumption to make. 26 days wasn't possible. Not with the current setup. After the call ended, I walked to Victor's office. That timeline won't work, I said, keeping my voice level. He looked up from his laptop. Make it work. I'm telling you it can't be done in 26 days. We have 3 vendor dependencies we don't control. If even one of them slips, We miss the date and lose the client's confidence. He waved his hand. You're overthinking it. Push the vendors. Victor. Aaron. He looked at me directly. I gave the client a date. Your job is to deliver it. He went back to his screen. I stood there for one quiet moment. Then I turned around, walked back to my desk, and opened my email. I wrote the email carefully. Not from anger. Not as a complaint. Just as a clear, professional record. Hi Victor, following up on today's call. Per your direction, I'll move forward with the revised delivery target of the 22nd. I want to flag, for the record, that the current vendor schedule and required testing phases create significant delivery risk. I've outlined the key dependencies below and noted where the most likely gaps could develop. Please let me know if you'd like to adjust the approach before I communicate this timeline to the integration team. Then I listed every risk factor in order. Numbered. Specific. Professional. I copied Claire Novak, our department head, and the senior project coordinator. I didn't exaggerate anything. I didn't use the word impossible. I didn't frame it as a complaint about Victor's decision. I simply made the risk visible, in writing, with my name and a timestamp attached. Victor read it within 4 minutes. I could see the read receipt. He didn't reply. That was fine. The email existed now. The record existed. If the timeline held, we would all move forward. If it didn't, and I was almost certain it wouldn't, there was a written record showing who had seen the problem coming, when they had said so, and exactly what they had flagged. Paper trails are quiet. But they are very patient. The rollout hit its first wall on day 11. One of our primary vendors, a logistics integration firm that handled the data transfer phase, contacted me to say a system update on their end had pushed their availability out by 9 days. There was nothing we could do about it. The delay was entirely on their side. I documented it and notified the team immediately. Victor's response came back in under 10 minutes. Can we go around them? I replied with a short, clear explanation of why we couldn't. They held a specific system access point that the entire migration depended on. There was no workaround that didn't require rebuilding a significant section from scratch, which would cost us more time, not less. He didn't reply after that. By day 14, a second vendor flagged a parts availability issue affecting the physical installation. Another delay. Another documented notification from me. Victor told leadership we were dealing with unforeseen technical friction that the team was actively managing. He didn't reference my earlier email. He didn't mention the risks I had flagged in writing before the timeline was even communicated to the client. He described the delays as surprises. Ms. Obi's team, meanwhile, had started sending questions directly to my inbox. A performance review meeting was requested. The room would be considerably bigger this time. I arrived at the second Hargrove meeting before anyone else. This conference room was different, a longer table, more chairs. Ms. Obi had brought 5 people from Hargrove Financial. Our firm had sent Victor, me, Claire Novak, and James Adeyemi, our VP of Client Operations. James Adeyemi being in that room told me everything I needed to know about how far this had escalated. Victor opened the meeting the way he always did, smoothly, with the practiced confidence of someone who had rehearsed in his head that morning. He talked about progress achieved and proactive management of emerging challenges. He used the word momentum. I sat quietly and let him run. Then Ms. Obi placed a printed document on the table. It was a comparison chart, the delivery milestones we had promised against the actual outputs to date. She slid it toward the center of the table without saying a word. James Adeyemi leaned forward to read it. Victor kept his expression steady. But I noticed his hand had moved to the edge of the table. "We're concerned," Ms. Obi said. Her tone was measured, polite in the way that is actually more serious than any raised voice. "What you're showing us doesn't match what we were told to expect." The room went quiet. Eyes moved toward Victor. Not toward me. Toward him. Can you help us understand the gap? James Adeyemi asked. His voice was calm. But nothing about that question was soft. Victor nodded steadily. Absolutely. What we've encountered is a series of vendor-side disruptions that fell outside our original projected parameters. Our team has been managing them actively. The original projections, Ms. Obi said, looking at the document in front of her, were flagged as high risk internally before the timeline was communicated to Hargrove. Were those flags shared with your leadership? A pause. Victor opened his mouth. We had active discussions around delivery risk as part of our standard process. I'm asking specifically about the 20-second deadline, she said. Was there an internal concern raised about that date before it was shared with our team? The room was very still. Victor's mouth opened, closed, opened again. We assessed the timeline collectively, he said carefully. Ms. Obi looked up from the document. Who developed the original project model? A longer pause this time. Victor's eyes moved. Not to me. Down to the table. James Adeyemi had a notepad in front of him. His pen had stopped moving. 4 full seconds of silence passed. I counted them. And in those 4 seconds, the answer to Ms. Obi's question became undeniable, not because anyone said it, but because Victor could not find a comfortable way to answer a simple question. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shift in my seat or look at Victor or do anything to draw attention to the moment. I simply said, calmly, I developed the original model. That was it. No accusation behind it. No edge in my tone. Just a factual sentence delivered the way you state something that has always been true. Ms. Obi nodded slowly. And the written risk flag on the timeline, was that yours as well? Yes, I said. I sent a detailed summary of the delivery risks on the same day the 22nd date was confirmed. I can provide a copy for the record. James Adeyemi wrote something on his notepad. Ms. Obi leaned back slightly. That explains quite a bit, she said. She didn't say it with heat. She said it the way you say something when a piece that was missing finally drops into place. Victor said nothing. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. The paper trail I had been quietly building over the past several weeks, the time-stamped emails, the flagged risks, the documented communications, was about to do the rest of the work for me. I had made no accusation in that room. I had simply answered 2 questions honestly. But the room had done its own arithmetic, and from James Adeyemi's expression, the numbers weren't coming out in Victor's favor. 2 days after the Hargrove meeting, Claire Novak called me into her office. She didn't ease into it. Leadership has opened a formal review of the account, she said. We've been asked to pull all documentation, emails, version files, project logs, everything connected to the Hargrove work, going back to the beginning. I nodded. I can have my files ready by end of day. She studied me for a moment. How organized are they? Very, I said. They were. The review team, 2 people from our internal audit function, spent 3 days working through the shared drive. They pulled version histories on every document tied to the account. They cross-referenced email timestamp. They examined file metadata, which records the name of the person who originally created a document and every person who subsequently touched it. Metadata doesn't respond to a confident tone. It doesn't reward a polished answer. It simply records what happened and when. The original deck showed my name as the file's author. Every slide, including slide 14 with the variance model. The version Victor had presented was a copy, created from my file 17 minutes after I had sent it to him. His name appeared nowhere in the creation history. Nothing had been forged. Nothing had been deleted. It had simply been taken. And now the record showed exactly how. HR reached out on a Thursday morning. The woman who met with me was named Patricia, calm and professional, with a notepad and the kind of manner that made it clear she had handled situations like this more than once. She explained that the review had raised questions about the project documentation and that she wanted to understand my experience and involvement on the Hargrove account. I didn't rant. I didn't perform. I placed a folder on the table and opened it. Inside were printed copies of every relevant document. The original email chain from the night I sent Victor the deck and his 12-minute reply. The follow-up email flagging the delivery risks, with the CC list and timestamp clearly visible. A log of the check-in calls with notes on which questions had been directed to me by name. The file metadata report confirming authorship of every slide. I walked Patricia through each document in sequence. Calm. Organized. No emotion behind any of it. I described what had happened factually, the same way I would present data to a client. I didn't use the word stolen. I didn't call Victor a liar. I let the documents say what needed to be said. She took steady notes throughout. When I finished, she thanked me. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and got back to work. I had said everything that needed saying. The rest was no longer in my hands. The first news came through Paul. He found me at the coffee station on a Friday afternoon, keeping his voice low. "Victor's been removed from the account," he said. "Effective this morning." I nodded slowly. "Okay." He hesitated. "There's more. Word is he's been placed on administrative leave while the review finishes." I poured my coffee and said nothing. The official communication came the following Monday, a brief message from Claire, sent to the Hargrove project team, stating that the account was being restructured and that new leadership would be confirmed shortly. That afternoon, Claire called me directly. "Hargrove has made a specific request," she said. "They've asked that you lead the account going forward. Ms. Obi sent the note herself, with your name written in it." I sat with that for a moment. "I'd like to review the full scope before I confirm," I said. Claire almost laughed. "Aaron, the client specifically named you. That doesn't happen very often." "I know," I said. "I'd still like to see the scope." She sent it over within the hour. I read it carefully. Then I wrote back and accepted. There was no celebration. No loud moment of triumph. I pulled up the project files, reviewed exactly where things stood, and started building a recovery plan. The work still needed to be finished. And now, finally, I was the one responsible for finishing it. 8 weeks later, Claire called me back into her office. The Hargrove implementation had closed successfully, delivered on a revised timeline that I had set myself, one that was honest and achievable and met without drama. Ms. Obi had sent a written commendation to our leadership team. She mentioned my name specifically, noting my clear communication, technical ownership, and steady delivery under difficult conditions. Claire slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a promotion letter. Director of Planning Strategy. The role I had been working toward for 2 years. I read through it fully before I said a word. "This is the scope I was told about 18 months ago," I said. "The title is the same," Claire confirmed. "But the compensation has been adjusted upward. And the reporting structure puts you directly in line for senior leadership consideration in the next cycle." I looked at the letter again. "I want this to be handled openly," I said. "I want the team to understand the scope of the role and what it means for how the department works going forward." "Agreed," Claire said. I signed the letter that afternoon. Not because I had been the loudest person in the room. Not because I had pushed the hardest. Because I had done the work. And in the end, that had always been enough. Victor was not fired with any kind of announcement. There was no company-wide email. No dramatic exit through the front doors with a cardboard box and security on his heels. He simply stopped appearing. His name was removed from project documentation one afternoon. His office was cleared quietly, in the early evening when most of the floor had already gone home. A few weeks after his administrative leave was confirmed, word filtered through that his employment had been ended as a result of the formal review findings. No press release. No public statement. Just gone. And somehow that was more sobering than any loud ending would have been. Because the quiet kind of ending doesn't give you a clear moment to close the chapter. It simply fades, and you're left realizing that someone who once seemed confident and untouchable had become the most difficult thing to recover from in a professional setting. Not hated, not disgraced in a dramatic way, just permanently marked, in reference calls, in background checks, in the quiet conversations that happen between people who work in the same industry and know each other well. He had believed he could perform competence without actually possessing it, and a single question in a conference room had quietly unraveled everything he had built on that belief. I think about that conference room sometimes, the light coming through the glass wall on the left side. The way Ms. Obi's pen went still when Victor couldn't find the answer. The way the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet way where everyone feels it at once and nobody has to say it out loud. For most of my career, I believed that good work was its own protection. That if you delivered real results and stayed professional, the recognition would follow eventually. That people who took credit for things they didn't build would always get caught in the end. Sometimes that's true. But what I learned that year was something more specific. Good work needs to be documented. Not because you're planning a fight, but because facts without records are just stories, and stories can be rewritten by whoever speaks the loudest. Records can't. You don't have to outshout someone who takes what's yours. You just have to outlast them. You build your paper trail. You do your work. You answer questions honestly when the room finally asks them. And you let the truth find its own ground, because it always does if you give it enough time. Nadia and I brought our daughter home 4 weeks after the promotion came through. I sat in the quiet of our house and thought, this is why you don't become bitter. You just keep building.